I'm now at the Syntagma Square metro station, down at the first level below grade, looking at what's called the archaeological section. And what it looks like is the archaeological stratigraphy of this site. At least I hope that's an authentic version of it, that it's not a reproduction, but it may be. But anyway, I'm just going to walk down here slowly so we can see it. But what I'm guessing it shows is walls that they found where they've just hopefully just cut them off at this point and preserved them for our view. And this, interestingly, looks like a modern sewer, but maybe it's not. Let's see what the sign says. It says Pit of Peristrated Aqueduct. First half of the 5th century BC. Look at that. If you didn't know it was made out of clay, if you couldn't see that it was, you'd assume it was something more modern. And you can actually see where they dug it out, filled it back in like we would with a clean, small gravel, if you will, to protect the pipe, and then put the heavier stuff in above and then capped it. Notice the capstone on top. And then some other pipe above it. But this represents a grave from the 2nd century BC. So what is that hole? Was it in the sarcophagus? Was it some kind of a drain for bodily fluids? Man, am I ever winging it on this one. Is this another grave? Was that a kind of a pillow of stone, if you will? And here another, yes, appears to be. Well, don't get much more direct than this. This is great if it's what it originally, if it's in situ. In other words, if this is the way that it was found, where they actually show how, because of the soil shifting or the ground shifting, the top of the sarcophagus opened up a bit and water carried debris and mud in to partially cover the skull and so forth. But this from the 4th century BC. Amazing. And they're from the grave from the 1st century AD, and in between it, 4th century BC. So there's the dividing line, but somewhere in between those two positions is Christ as our benchmarker. And here the base of a grave monument in the 4th century BC. And perhaps that line up above represents the grade at that time in 1st AD or something like that. I'll step back a bit now so we can see a broader view of what we've just looked at. Okay. And now we'll continue. Now I'm guessing that this brown stone, or brown that we see here, represents either fill or material. Actually it looks like building material, road to Mesogana, Gaia, or something like that. So that's what this is. That's fill, and then the road bed surface there, maybe 4, 5 or so brick wides, but maybe this was where it climbed up an elevation or something. And again, I'm just winging it. But here, for some reason, it hits a stone wall, or 2, or 3, or 4. Early Christian grave. Another early Christian grave. And I'm not sure if those stones mark out the lengths or the widths of the graves. And there, curiously, what looks like a wall, but then as though it were covering something, like maybe, I don't know. Another grave, and another grave, and another grave. That's pretty fascinating stuff. 4th century Ionic capital. Who knows from what? Cindy, you've lucked out again. So what's neat about this is that we can see how that pipe that we saw this end of it, how that would be that part right there to the left of this line, how it dovetailed in there, and it looks like I think they filled it in with lead. Not an irrational idea at all. And then these holes, this one in particular, looking very specifically man-made cut, because you can see how it's angled there on the edge, this left side. Might have been for an individual home drainage into the sewer, would be my guess. Now, would it have been positioned this way, or would it have been positioned more at an angle, rotated maybe a little bit less than 40 degrees or something like that, left or right? Or did it just dump down straight into it? And it's interesting to see that there were paint on it also. Is that coloration inside, that dark color, is that kind of like synonymous with desert varnish that occurs on rocks in the southwest desert as a result of just the weather there? And this may be just a water, yeah, it's a water sewer runoff, what we might call a gutter. 1st century to BC to 1st century AD beehive box. And I don't know if that has anything to do with the plumbing or not, or whether it's just a box. And I don't know if these pieces of what like gray metal were used to hold it together, or whether they were used to lock it in place somehow. Guessing and hoping that these things are from the stratigraphy that was carved out when they built this subway system. A fragment of a mosaic floor, end of 4th, beginning of 5th century AD. Don't know what this word lotophoros means. Now these devices over to the left are loom weights. You can see here, look at the bottom of that diagram and you can see those weights holding down the strings of the loom. There's various lamps from the 1st century and the 3rd century and the 4th century and the 5th century and the 6th century, and these from the 2nd century. But what's interesting is, for all those centuries, it essentially didn't change. Imagine the evolution, or just recognize the evolution we've seen in maybe the last 10 years, maybe 15, in flashlights. Marble gravestone markers. Presumably this lower part is not finished off because it was implanted in the ground and didn't have to be, and actually maybe gave better support in the ground. And then above that, I think we can see there were some kind of notation, so epitaphs would be there. I hadn't seen this before. First, the left-hand one and the third one from the left are Roman, and the second from the left and the right one are Hellenistic Greek. Ungantari, and there's the perfume vessels, that's what these are. Except this one is a pithos with a lid, 3rd century BC. These others are 2nd century BC. Small grave stele. Also are grave markers. The one on the right here is Greek, and it would have been rather pretty in its day. The other two are Roman. Once again, size seems to matter, at least in the minds of the people who installed them. All these references to shafts and so forth, and the National Garden shaft are part of this metro station's excavation or something else. But anyway, these are, this is a trough, a water drain trough. This is part of the sewer system that we already had seen parts of. They said it was a very thick network here, like it was a major intersection for these things, and a very complex system throughout Athens. Here another pipe, and here may be some of the trenches too. These are first century wine amorphes. And apparently these things to some degree were discarded, maybe when they were broken, but seemingly almost like we do plastic bottles. I don't think with that prevalence. They're too big, too expensive to make, and presumably they still remain functional after they've been used for wine or oil. What I think is what I call park art, some kind of modernistic sculpture. We'll look at it from a couple of sides before we go downstairs, see if there's anything down there before you enter through those turnstiles or gates, if you will, to get access to the metro. We're looking down a sewer line, only something that Cindy and I could appreciate, and other people of our ilk. Not sure what this is supposed to represent, although it looks like that it pivots there when the wheels would turn. But also notice there's a clock hanging from it. Whether that clock and that are conceptually interconnected, I don't know. I'm just panning from across the hallway, just so you can see the scope of this. Probably this wall of stratigraphy could have been extended to the total outskirts of Athens. And ready to leave Syntagma Square for the last time, except tomorrow when I'll pass underneath here on the metro on the way to the airport. There's the McDonald's. It's always interesting to me, somewhat in a guilty way, that I can stand here with a $1,200 camera in my hand and video a man who is reduced to accepting the reality of sleeping on the ground with people going by him and a can of beer next to him. That's his life, and that can of beer probably represents what to me are the luxuries of my life. On the other hand, that man leaning up against the post down there probably comes every morning after he's gone to the butcher shop and gets a bag full of scraps from the butcher and comes and feeds 2 dogs, one here and there's another one nearby. And those dogs are very comfortable with that, obviously. The dark one is pushed aside gently, while the other one that you can't see, the golden one behind there, old but fat. And then when the older one has had his fill, the dark one gets his fill, and they both sit down and relax. But 2 little vignettes of mankind. Bench nearby, I walked probably 10 minutes ago, and this jacket and the socks were lying there, and they're still there, and there's no one around. My guess is the man was, for whatever reason, just left them there with his bottle of water and walked away. Who knows what that story is.